All right, so I do want to report, and I'll repeat. Some of you have heard this already. I'm going to go ahead and repeat this. I just discovered what a hassle it's going to be to run Talos on my Mac Minis, and I have mostly decided not to do it and to go back to just running a Ubuntu server on them. How's it going? And I want to tell you why. I want to justify my thinking on that. And I'm kind of disappointed because I was super excited about Talos. But having rethought all of this, it's not entirely sour grapes to say I'm kind of glad that I went through this because I think Talos is the wrong pick for the hardware and the situation that I have been setting up. And let me describe why. Let me start by saying that I think I found the optimal Talos deployment. And by the way, Talos has got, before I start saying why I don't want to use it, there's still a lot of reasons to use Sidero. And they're, they're, they have a really great, where is it? They have a really great page called use cases. And I am not giving up on Sidero and Talos. I just am not set up to do it right now. I strongly suggest that you read internal Kubernetes platforms, Kubernetes at the edge, Kubernetes for regulated environments, which includes the air-gapped environment that I'm building at home. In the previous video, by the way, to this one, I did an hour-long explanation of why I think air-gapped are the only option for a home data center without impacting your entire family. And I strongly am an advocate for air gap now. In fact, the more I talked myself through it, I was like, oh my God, there's like so many things I didn't even think about that I kind of discovered as I was talking through it. So air gapped environment is where it's at. And that's what they mean by regulated environments. Portable Kubernetes clusters, in other words, you could just move with your cluster in hybrid Kubernetes. So make sure you read all those use cases. There are a lot of good ones there. And so yeah, so here we have what I had before. Now I've revised all of this quite a bit, and I'll talk about it later. And I just, if you haven't seen this, I have the air gap. This is the conceptual air gap data center lab, which I am going to be including in my write up about the path of joy and happiness to IT engineering career, because this is having one of these. Having the different components of this, maybe not the whole thing, but having the server after, moving, progressively evolving your Homelab as you evolve as an IT engineer is a part of the thing. It's a part of the path. So I think that's what I actually started out streaming about tonight. I'm writing that book, The Path of Joy and Happiness as an IT engineer. And I'm getting ready to write that so I can help people from very early age, as young as 10. And I'm going to go ahead and reread the email that I just got really quick, since I wasn't planning on doing this, but since this is going to go on YouTube, I do want to have this on YouTube. So, and believe me, this relates to the whole Talos thing. Hey, Mr. Rob, how's life with you? I wanted to check in, make sure you're doing well these days. Are you still teaching? We have never found a replacement for you and what you did for DJ's life as an education. You are still his favorite teacher. I just asked last week. He's at UNC early college now and still hasn't loved the teacher as much as you. If you're doing anything with the kiddos right now, please let us know. There's nothing good out there. The coding programs I've seen for his age are so beneath his potential based on how you taught him. They will only bore him and seem like something else he has to do. Anywho, thanks in advance. Now, so what I'm trying to say here is that this particular kind of infrastructure or building this out is more valuable to help people, even young people or old people, learn than anything else. We're heading into the convention stuff, and I'm getting out sidetracked. But before I throw this diagram at you, I wanted to show you that. That's why I was so excited that this was going to be my Talos cluster. So the long and short of it is, why no Talos? These Mac Minis do not do iPixie very well, and even if I did get it to work, it was a pain in the butt. It's probably something I could still debug. So let me just tell you my story, and you can kind of make your own decisions. So I tried it on an Optiplex, which is one of these guys on the top, and then I tried it on one of these other Mac Minis, Mini 1 actually. And I had to burn a USB stick from the Pixie site, which you can go find. Trying to find where the Pixie site is. I mean, if you search for iPixie, you can find it. And then so this is the firmware site. And in case you're wondering, iPixie is gPixie. There's lots of blogs out there about gPixie. iPixie is now that. You can click on the fact. It'll tell you right here. How does it relate to gPixie? iPixie is the official replacement for gPixie. So, but as I was reading through this, it became obvious that it's I don't have very many options on Mac Minis. In fact, I was super happy that I was able to even install, Ubuntu server on there, which works, by the way. But so I burned an iPixie, to call it a chain booter BIOS, or firmware onto a USB stick, and I booted off the USB stick, using the option to boot from stick, and it did it, but it waited around. It took about 10 minutes for it to get off of the checking all devices screen. And my best guess on that is that it didn't have a DHCP server to go to. And so it had this like excruciatingly long timeout pulling, window where it was trying to get DHCP resolution and it couldn't find it. And since I went back to this air gap network, there is no DHCP server on this network at all. However, the last time I did this, when I did it on the Optiplex, it popped up right away. And it gave me the iPixie command prompt, and you can go into there. What storage use? We don't have any storage yet. The storage is just going to be NFS for now, and local attached storage. There's no NAS in here. The Plex is an Optiplex Dell. And these have terabyte drives. I'm probably going to put them in a Ceph cluster or stuff. But we'll talk about that later. So, anyway, so the Mini would not get to the iPixie prompt. The really cool thing about iPixie is when you run it, you can actually interrupt it, and you can get a command line, and you can get a DHCP lease, and you can see all the other stuff, and you can actually pull down something from the internet and run it. But the minis just had no luck. And I personally believe it's because it's something to do with the hardware. But I don't know. So, and then, I mean, as I started thinking about what it would take to do this and where I was going, and I was getting ready to set up the DHCP server over here so that I could try it again and see if that slows everything down. I mean, if it speeds it up, not slows it down, by having a DHCP server to go to. Maybe if it gets this DHCP IP address, maybe it'll get me to the command prompt faster. I don't know. I didn't get there because the thought process I went through as soon as I figured out all these problems was related to when something like this. So I was like, well, okay, in a perfect scenario, if I do get this to work, this is what I'm going to have to do to make Talos work. Now, Talos, you got to remember, Talos is supposed to make your life easier, right? It's supposed to make your life easier by combining all of the infrastructure management into the cluster API stuff, and it's basically turning your entire machine into a Kubernetes node that can only be managed by cluster CTL and by Talos and all that stuff, and hiding you from all those pesky details like NVIDIA drivers, which only have beta support in Talos, and other stuff like that. So that got me thinking about some things, and this is my thought process as to why I think Talos is a horrible pick for these Mac Minis. So when I thought, oh yeah, that would be great. So, so in a best case scenario, I would have, and I almost did this. I almost bought, I have a whole bunch of 8 gigabyte USB sticks, right? Because there's no CD-ROM on these or anything. All the iPixie things tell you to burn a CD-ROM and have it be permanently in your device so that when it boots off the CD-ROM, which tricks it into doing its thing that it should have done anyway if it was a modern device and had NetBoot, right? So all of that stuff is to get around the hassle of you not having NetBoot because you have old hardware, or stupid Apple hardware. And so that's already a huge exceptional amount of work just to get Pixie even on it. So I would have to burn 23 USB sticks. I would have to permanently have them attached to the devices. When I booted the device, every time I booted the device, I would have to go in there and hit B on every device to get it to boot from the Pixie boot, because you can't set that as your default boot path because Mac doesn't let you do that. By default, Mac always boots from the, it's so annoying. But you cannot go in there and say, I want to boot from this USB stick every time. In order to boot from USB, and by the way, there's a lot of Mac, the newer Macs don't even do, they do EFI boot versus this other kind of boot. So it's not, there was a whole bunch of people complaining about the modern Mac hardware not even booting from USB at all, like at all. And then I'm starting to regret my criticism of Red Hat for not supporting Mac Linux stuff. Like, hey, how dare you? You should always support Linux no matter where it occurs. And I still agree by that. And Ubuntu runs much more cleanly on these Mac Minis than Red Hat did. I had to do a bunch of other crap and I had extra steps to even get Red Hat to install and run on there. Ubuntu server just went right on. It worked no problems at all. So, count your lucky stars for that. And because I don't want to throw away these machines. These are left over. That's the way I have them. Otherwise, I mean, it's, I was like, it's like $23,000 worth of computing hardware. I'm going to use it for something instead of, it's just this Mac Minis and you never get recoup the cost. So I'm like, okay. Boycott Apple yeah. Oh, I agree with Apple. Apple's very predatory. Yeah. And I, look, I am not an Apple fan. I don't know how many times I've had to say that. I am not an Apple company fan. I happen to use their hardware because I would much rather have a Mac Pro than a Windows machine at work. Mostly because they're usually higher, better value, and they actually work as opposed to the Windows thing they gave me. Couldn't run a VM on it and everything. And they're just amazing devices. It's just the company itself is horrible. So what's the reality? The reality is if I even was going to get this hack to work, I would have had to purchase 23 8 gigabyte or whatever. You get, this is the smallest you can get these days. USB sticks, make them permanently attached. I would have to burn all of those, have those attached, and then every time I had a power outage right now until I get my USB, which my universal power supply UPS, even if I did have a UPS, in order to boot these again to get them to get the new OS, which is pretty common by the way, right? So in order to get the new OS on these things, what do you have to do? You have to reboot them, right? So what I'm telling you is that based on my interactions with the Mac stuff, I could not. So let's say, okay, so Talos, I know enough about Talos to know, to put me to work on a Mac, my practically goes near zero. Yeah. So, that was our problem too. So the whole appeal of Talos, and this is, I think I really saved myself a lot of time by making this decision early. The whole appeal of Talos is that I'm supposed to be able to reconfigure the hardware, including partition tables and stuff. Talos will do all that internally by just restarting. The whole appeal of it is that you go into the BIOS on these machines and you set them and forget them, and then when they reboot, they automatically get they get a brand new Pixie boot image that's been customized for that device. That's the whole idea behind the HTTP Pixie server. So you have an HTTP Pixie server for Talos that is managed by Sidero. It's managed by Sidero, and while you're setting up Sidero, then when you boot from the Mac Mini, that the idea is that you go into Talos CTL or whatever, and you reboot, and it grabs all the new configuration, and pops your device and restarts it, and it grabs a new version of its OS that it then downloads from Pixie all in the background. Now that assumes a lot. That assumes that you are able to set TFTP booting or Pixie booting as a default method for booting for your device in the BIOS, and I can't. That means that the very value for Talos is completely negated for me, because that means that I would have to, like, let's say I was to go into the Talos thing, which I didn't get that far, but if I were to get into the Talos configuration stuff and I was to go change up some variables or add beta support for NVIDIA drivers or something like that, and then I wanted to start my Talos cluster over again, I could do a thing that would go to all of my Talos hardware nodes, but every one of them would be rebooted, and it would send them a reboot signal. And so it would reboot, and its idea is it's supposed to be rebooting and then pulling down the Pixie OS, the latest Pixie OS. Alpine also Talos. No, it doesn't. So, it. I mean, I could probably install Talos on the operating system, but I don't know. Maybe that's I don't that still doesn't get past the Pixie boot part. You know what I mean? Because you cannot change the operating. The whole entire point of Talos is managing, as far as I know, and I could have this wrong, is managing all of the hardware. And you can't manage the hardware unless you've booted from something else that's not dependent on the underlying hard drive and stuff like that. I mean, it's very possible that I could just put Talos on all of these things and on all of these machines and then just reboot, right? Because Talos is the OS that Sidero boots into. That's the OS that it puts on there. But I don't know. I might be missing something. I hope I am, because at this moment, I don't think that I can boot. I don't think I can put Pixie Boot on here at all. And we know that Talos has a hard requirement on Pixie Booting. Very, very hard requirement on that. And so that is enough. You know, all I have to really say is, in order to Pixie Boot from a Mac Mini, number one, you have to have a USB stick, period. You can't even do it without it. Number two, when you read the reboot, you have to touch a key every time. And you would have to boot into Pixie, and then the rest of the stuff could be done through DHCP or stuff. But the best possible scenario, I would have to physically reboot every machine and touch the keyboard anytime I wanted to make any change to any of the configuration in my cluster. And I'm not doing that. That negates the entire point. The whole point of Talos is to get out of your way and just have it be this black box transparent thing. Well, it's not a black box. It's a bunch of Mac Minis that are silver that don't want to play nice. So you know what the Mac Minis are really great at doing though? Running a bunch of server. They run a bunch of server. They sing along just no problem. They have no problems at all. And they obviously have been taking a bunch of configuration through Ansible. So my conclusion is that if you want to do Talos, and I probably still will do a Talos cluster, I don't have any room in my rack for it at the moment. But if I were to actually do a Talos cluster, what I would do is I would buy 3 or 4 or 5 Dell Optiplex machines, and I would put Talos on those, and then I would make them so that they do a TFTP boot properly. And that's the kind of thing where you would just set them in the corner and you could run the entire thing through Talos and you wouldn't have any problems with it at all. So that is an option, but it's not going to be, or if you're doing Raspberry Pis or something like that, but it's hard to get a Raspberry Pi these days. There's no courses. I recommend you do the boost. That's what I recommend. We're gonna come back to that in a bit, and we're gonna talk about that. I also have a recommendation on my Learn thing that tells you what I would learn. So we're actually gonna cover that, but I just wanted to finish this video about why I'm no longer using Talos, and I think that pretty much covers it. So instead, what are we gonna do? We're gonna keep a bunch of server on here. We're gonna manage everything through Ansible. We're going to make HPZ 640 just a regular mainstream server. It's going to have a container engine on it, Podman container engine, and it's going to have a virtualization engine on it. By the way, this is what got me to wanting to write this book today. This is the most important piece of your Homelab after you set up Linux on your first laptop or desktop, but preferably a laptop. So, and that's going to get me back to to what I was writing, the path of geekness. As you build up your home lab to something like this, it doesn't have to be this. And what are you going to do and how are you going to learn it? What are you going to put on there? So this includes, this thing is going to be running libvirt KVM. I'm not going to run Proxmox. Why? Because Proxmox is irrelevant in the industry. It's nice for home labs, but it's irrelevant in the industry. It's actually more important that you learn how to fire up a virtual machine using Ansible or Terraform than it is to ever learn Proxmox. So I'm going to get back to that, but this is now, so what is going to go on these boxes, these minis? We're going to be back to doing kubeadm and Init on there. I haven't decided. I'm probably going to keep kubeadm and Init on this, and this will be my only Kubernetes cluster. I am toying with the idea, I'm just going to put it out there, I'm toying with the idea of actually not putting Kubernetes on my other cluster and having this become a PBS batch processing cluster. Because it's designed to run long-running jobs. They have fantastically huge GPUs, and that is not something that lends itself well to Kubernetes. So these machines with the big old GPUs on them are more designed to be, like part of a batch workflow. That's what we have at work, actually, by the way. At work, we have a Kubernetes cluster that does microservices, that ephemeral, they come up and down, and very little persistence at all in there. And then we have, PBS, which is running all of our really high power machine learning jobs, and they run for a long time. And then you have to chime into them and talk to them and everything. And actually I want to write some software that interfaces from Kubernetes into the PBS system to provide a PBS REST API, which is something like what we've been writing at work, but I want to do it in an open source way so that you can manage PBS workflows for larger machine learning jobs from a Kubernetes application, which puts everything doing its right thing. It's actually bad architecture to have long running, highly CPU intensive jobs in Kubernetes cluster. That's not what it's designed for, particularly if there's a lot of persistence and like if people are sad if all of a sudden, your terabyte data model is corrupted or something like that. So that's not what Kubernetes is for. Kubernetes is for microservices which are really, one hit, quick running things that are making incremental changes or reads, a lot of REST and GraphQL APIs and stuff like that. It's not designed to do a lot of long running crap. I love stateful sets. I think stateful sets are one of the greatest additions to Kubernetes, but let's admit it. Stateful sets are kind of making up for a bunch of failures in Kubernetes to do what people want. And I think the reason stateful sets were most recently added they are absolutely the most recent significant resource added to Kubernetes. The reason they're added is because Kubernetes is kind of waking up and like, state's actually kind of a thing. I mean, storage has been a second class citizen in Kubernetes since the beginning. And, so I don't, and persistence and all that stuff, state in general has been a problem. So I'm not against stateful sets. I think you need to have them for sure. Obviously, I think it's going to really change what Kubernetes becomes. But you're never going to turn Kubernetes into a batch processing system. It's just not designed for it. It's not. It's designed to handle lots and lots of. It's designed to be highly, highly available, highly, highly concurrent, and serve up lots and lots of requests and answers. And the occasional, crunch job of some kind. That's not its primary IT purpose. It never has been. I mean, Kubernetes came about because they needed to create some way to make sense of all these microservices that they were independently popping up as daemons in VMs all over the place. That's what they were doing. They were putting them in containers all over the place. And they're like, God, there's so many of these things. We need these things up and running and answering questions and communicating with each other. And this is talking to that and all that. So Borg, when it came about at Google, that's the purpose, in my opinion. It all must be ephemeral, but it's not true in real life. Things do need state. They do need state. And so, and frankly, one of the biggest failures, and I don't know if it's a failure of Kubernetes itself as a project, or if it's a failure from the community. Thank you for that follow. To understand the purpose of Kubernetes. And the fact that stateful sets were the most recent thing added it tells you a lot about that, right? Because at some point, it's like, it's all ephemeral. It's just a thing. It's just answering this thing from this database over here that doesn't even live in Kubernetes for a long time. For a long time, all the microservices and everything, the databases and stuff were outside of Kubernetes. So Kubernetes was just a big fancy web server, really. I mean, that's really what it was. It was a big way of dealing with all these containers that are running different bits and pieces of middleware that are all communicating with each other. Oh, did you find the Borg paper? Oh, fantastic. We need to go read that. And so, yeah, I think that I think that Kubernetes is really, really good at keeping stuff around. I mean, it's got lots and lots of my DBs in Kubernetes too. Everybody does. And that now we got people running virtual machines inside of Kubernetes, which is just so stupid. I think it's so stupid. I'm just going to say it. I'm going to get all kinds of hate mail for saying that. It's absolutely stupid to do that. And frankly, I'm going to say something else is going to get me in big, big trouble, especially with the Talos people. I don't think Kubernetes has any business managing your hardware. That's not its purpose. And could it do it? Perhaps. I mean, it does seem like the hardware is just yet another resource. But you talk about state, an operating system is the most stateful thing. I mean, you can make the OS kind of ephemeral and do that whole booting and pixie booting thing. I don't know. I am not convinced. At the end of the day, Kubernetes is a glorified web server that does a bunch of microservice communications between different things. It's a big glorified middleware deployment thing. And that's what it should be kept as. If you try to keep crossing the streams or adding more state or anything with persistence, you're going to get burned. And so, I mean, yeah. So like for example, Harbor. Let me give you an example. So Harbor is a container registry system, right? So no more AI and ML. Well, I'm definitely going to try it. But I don't know. I'm definitely going to try AI and machine learning on Kubernetes. And by the way, this is something that my team at work is in charge of doing. So we have people running machine learning jobs in Kubernetes right now. The fact of the matter is we don't know how many of them are actually doing that. I think, honestly, I don't think they're doing very much of it. I haven't been able to prove this yet to my team because we don't know what's running in our cluster at all. We have no visibility into what's running in our cluster at all. It's one of my biggest complaints. And I can't talk about this because I get in trouble by even saying this. When you resize your volumes, yes. Yeah, there's somebody, I just heard about another team that's throwing stuff out on their head. Yeah. Podcasters who I mostly respect keep wanting to run their Postgres instances in Kubernetes. Kelsey asked him if he would recommend DBs, and he emphatically told them not to do it and to just pay Amazon. Yeah, look, it's because databases, when you have something as stateful as a database, it doesn't make sense to put it in Kubernetes. Now, it does make it kind of nice because then you don't have competing Postgres versions, right? So, by the way, in my architecture, the way I plan on addressing that, and these things kind of go together, right? So, VMs and containers without Kubernetes. Containers without Kubernetes do a pretty good job at databases and stuff like that. But then even more than that, a VM, running a VM that's got Postgres on it, that you've configured and has state and everything. At the end of the day, the database, if you look at most of the early diagrams of like database integration with Kubernetes, the databases are always outside of the scope of the Kubernetes cluster. You run a VM queries with KubeVirt. Yeah, I know. We're not doing that. I just talked about that. I'm never doing that. It's totally stupid. This mania to put everything into Kubernetes is very misguided. And the fact that Hightower says the same thing just increases his cred with me phenomenally, because it's not designed to do that. It's like, if it's good, if this is good, we must have to, do it for everything. Store my media library as an erasure code pool. Yeah. Advisor on triple replicated SSDs. Right. Okay. So so the whole storage question is the real thing. So let's go back to the Harbor example. So I am going to deploy Harbor to Kubernetes because it likes to be in Kubernetes, even though Git has a registry, and I don't even know if I need Harbor now. I'm probably going to do Harbor because Harbor has Trivy, which does scanning of your containers for security vulnerabilities. And I want to get good with that and be able to do some security scanning using Harbor and Trivy, which comes with Harbor. So, but the preferred Harbor deployment, it'll deploy as a standalone at a VM, or you can deploy it as a cluster in a Kubernetes cluster. And then the problem, though, is that now you have a Kubernetes cluster that's dependent on a registry that runs in the Kubernetes cluster. So, and then the way that people address that is that they will fire up an infrastructure cluster, which I'm still considering doing. Originally, I was going to have this be the infrastructure cluster and run all my high performance stuff there, right? So that would be Elasticsearch and Grafana and all of those kinds of things. And then and then have this, have my other clusters depend on the registry running in there. Well, another thing that I could do for that, I won't give it. I was talking about through specifically. Yes. So, so one of the things that I'm considering is, first of all, I think that the VM thing needs to be re-examined. I think that virtual machines have come a long way, particularly with the KVM technology. And I think it's fair to say that the ecosystem for virtual machine management, particularly micro virtual machines, such as the ones used to fulfill Lambda, like Firecracker and stuff like that. These are super duper tiny, instantly booting virtual machines, not Vagrants. I didn't say Vagrant, Firecracker. So the technology with regard to virtualization, I have not read it. I've seen the beginning of it, and it's a Rust project, and it's really great. The load times that I read about in Firecracker are so substantial. I mean, it can bring up an entire VM in less time than it takes Kubernetes to allocate a pod. That's how fast it is, and that technology is going to take a huge chunk out of the Kubernetes ecosystem, in my opinion. Because at the end of the day, I don't want a container. I don't want a complicated pod with a bunch of ephemeral shit that has persistent volumes written all over creation. I want a VM that I control, that I know the storage and where it's at, and I want to be able to replicate that VM instantly. And that's exactly what Firecracker is. It's about VM. So this is what I'm going to predict. Kubernetes is going to see. I mean, it's already starting to see. Kubernetes is already starting to see a drop in. Now, when you read the Firecracker stuff, this is the thing I have to keep reminding myself. So Firecracker is primarily for Lambda, which means that you're going to read a lot of references to serverless computing and all that shit. And serverless has been wildly dismissed as an IT architecture. It's just got too many problems as a fundamental architecture. And I don't want to get into that right now, but it's a fail. It's a massive fail for many reasons that usually have to do. So if you think of Firecracker, the word you should think of when you think of Firecracker is micro VMs. So micro VMs are faster, safer, and more independent than, and you can put BSD or Windows or whatever you want on there, than containers. In fact, one of the other things I like about micro VMs is that micro VMs actually allow the full integration of BSD Unix systems in addition to all the other stuff. The containerized world is 100% dependent on Linux, and I don't like where Linux is going. I think this stuff happening with BSD, with Unix and other stuff like that is going to go in different places. And I think that the future is going to be micro VMs and VMs. So micro VMs versus containers. And here's the thing: as micro VMs become more powerful, we're talking about. I mean, you can do things with micro VMs that containers can't even dream of doing. You can virtualize the entire network layer. You can virtualize the entire storage layer. You can PXE boot and TFTP boot and all that. You can do things that containers can't even dream of doing. And you do it all without the hassle, particularly if they can run as non-root. Yeah, exactly. So to me, the future is actually not Kubernetes. I'm going to say it. The future to me, Kubernetes, I think, is going to fade away. I think I know we're right on the beginning of KubeCon coming up here. And what I'm trying to tell you is that I'm kind of glad that I went through all this hassle with Talos, because Talos is in a very convoluted, wonderful way, is good for Netflix. It might be good for Netflix for what they want to do if there's lots of microservices, right? There's one thing that Kubernetes is really, really good at: orchestrating containers. That's it. If you have a bunch of containers and you've chosen to, and by the way, most of those containers contain applications. Yeah, there's Fargate using Firecracker, right? So I think what's going to happen. I like the sound of virtualization networking layer. Oh my god, yeah, it's the stuff that you can do. So the virtualized network layer allows you to do VLAN tagging and all kinds of shit. Try that with a container. Try to create a VLAN as a service deployment on containers. No, just no. And by the way, the idea of running a VM inside of Kubernetes is fucking laughable. KubeVirt or KubeLibVM or whatever the fuck that is the stupidest project that's ever came out of the Kubernetes world. I hate it. And it flies in the face of practical thinking. And I just don't understand why anybody thought that would ever be a good idea. The only reason it exists is because somebody was annoyed that they couldn't run their VMs because they were only given access to Kubernetes. And they're like, shit, what am I going to do here? I can only use Kubernetes. Okay, well, let's see if I can bypass everything, run, a VM with privilege mode in a container and get to the underlying OS. It's totally stupid. It's absolutely stupid. I'm sorry if, I think the people are probably wonderful people. I'm not attacking you. I just think that project is totally fucking brain dead. And the projects, Linux NetNS maybe already virtual. Exactly. So I think Flyout does a lot of the ECS like workloads, but they already push a new machine product based on Firecracker. I think that micro VMs, forget about serverless. Okay, micro VMs all by themselves destroy containers as an architectural deployment model. Destroy it, like completely destroy it. What we're seeing with Firecracker is the beginning of micro VM existence and orchestration, and that is going to make Kubernetes look like your old decrepit, 1970s, mainframe. You're still probably going to need it though. You're going to be totally dependent on it. So, users run C directly, no middle layers. Yeah, well, and there's a bunch of stuff that's using run C directly these days, and I still think containers are a thing. Obviously, uses eBPF as a network layer. Yeah, I don't know about that. Yeah, I mean, the real question is whether that all of the hacks to networking that are happening in the eBPF space are going to ever catch up with virtualized networking that already exists in the KVM space, because they've already figured this problem out for the virtualization world. They've been doing it for years. So why are we reinventing an entire network layer in eBPF just because we want containers to be able to play? Because containers are in user space. Containers are in user application space. Why not focus our energies on the stuff that we're already good with, which is virtualization? And why don't we turn virtualization into, slim it down, put it on a diet? Because before, ESXi was nowhere near what you're going to get with micro VMs. So I think bottom line, if you're doing anything with microservices and containers, you need orchestration and high availability, and you want a lot of pieces of middleware and a lot of moving parts, including stuff that has internal databases, then Kubernetes is fine. Kubernetes is not the place to do mainstream machine learning. Most mainstream machine learning is going to need a much longer runtime, a much higher stability in terms of runtime, but not concurrency, right? we don't need a lot of concurrent access to batch jobs that are processing really big machine learning jobs. The architecture doesn't make any sense in Kubernetes to do that kind of thing. You can do it to a degree, and we are doing it. I'm currently being paid to help maintain a cluster that's apparently where I still, as I said, I don't think there's practically any machine learning jobs that are running in our Kubernetes cluster. What they're doing is they're running them in our batch cluster, our big ass PBS, massive 20,000 node. I'm not even exaggerating. One of the top 5 biggest in the world, if it was made public, which I can't talk about. That's why I can't tell you the name of my company. And it is running, almost all of it is running large batch jobs for machine learning all the time. And then we have Kubernetes that ties into that to get the data, to report on what the batch jobs are doing, and all of that stuff. And that's what Kubernetes is for. Kubernetes, in that sense, is a great big piece of middleware to the other big. I mean, in the macro sense, the batch processing is like, the underlying chugging along hard work of machine learning, and then you've got dealing with the models and testing the models, the output of the machine learning models, that the output models, not the input data, they have output data, and they have that stuff. You can take, you can use TensorFlow.js and make that available to anybody online. But that's providing a service, and that's like a microservices thing, and that's a Kubernetes thing. So, like Slash is fine. I don't know about that. Yeah. So I think, I got to tell you, I've been pretty good at predicting things over the last few years. The only thing I didn't predict well was virtual worlds, which strangely enough kind of failed. And then they came back in the form of, online video chat now. So now they're really huge again. And I soaked like 3 years into getting into Second Life and building out worlds there and everything. I was really into it, but I predicted the internet stuff a good 6 years before it happened. And I got ready and I started learning how to, bottom line, I know how to pick tech, and I'm telling you, the core architecture of Kubernetes flourishes when you're dealing with containers and microservices. As soon as it's at the end of the day, it's just a big middleware engine. That's what it is. And if you're using it at anything other than that, you're probably outside of the boundaries of stuff, and you should probably look for something else. So machine learning should probably be going in the extremely unsexy open PBS. And I cannot wait to play with this. Nobody's talking about these big ass batch processing systems right now because they are the workhorses of the world, and they're getting shit done all over the place. As an IT engineer, I think there is, yes. So let me get back to that. Actually, so let me, I'm sorry, I kind of got on a tangent. I was writing here and then I kind of got distracted by this explanation of why I'm moving off Talos. So let me just wrap up this video. So there's several reasons for getting off of Talos. The first one is it just doesn't work on the Mac Minis. It's too problematic with Pixie Boots. I mean, that's the main reason, right? And it might work for other things, but the second big reason that I've been really thinking about hard, this is the whole point of this exercise, is to cause you to think about your tech decisions as if you were doing them for a company, so you can really dig into them and understand why you're doing this and what is going to use it, right? As opposed to just, oh, hey, look, we can run VMs inside of Kubernetes. Isn't that cool? I don't give a shit about cool. I give a shit about productivity for specific types of applications and use cases and case studies and things like that. And I personally do not think that Kubernetes is the best place to do anything but microservices. So that's fine. That means if you're CPU bound, great, right? The reason that I'm going through this is I was like, oh no, I can't do machine learning on these Mac Minis because they're just CPUs. They don't have GPUs on them, right? Well, the more I've been realizing that frankly, honestly, I am not prepared to do this yet, but I'm on the edge of pulling my recommendation for Talos entirely because I think it's based on a fundamental flaw in architectural meta trends. And I do not think that the industry will ever go for having all of your infrastructure managed by Kubernetes. I do think that there's going to be a niche group of people, and for this, I would be willing to possibly get on board with this. But and this is one of the reasons I still like Talos and Sidero. If you want turnkey Kubernetes, Talos and Sidero are the way to do it. The problem is that you have to have the hardware to go with it. And I don't mind telling people my business idea that I had before that I was going to maybe throw at Talos is, and if they're not already doing it, is to ship to do an oxide computing and to ship Talos on hardware already, or say, okay, here is a preferred list of hardware devices that you could put a Talos cluster on easily. You go turn it on. The immutable OS. I think the immutable OS promise is, I think they're on the right path. I still think they're on the right path, but I don't know that it is going to be as significant as the micro virtualization is going to be. And it's kind of a race, isn't it? It's kind of a race, because if the micro virtualization, it turns out that it's just so easy. I mean, seconds to fire up a thing. Then what's the whole point of all those case studies for the Talos and Sidero stuff? What's the entire point? Now you've got Kubernetes that you can take with you anywhere you want. And that is really the only way I would use Talos now. If I was going to do Talos again, this is what I would do. If I was going to do Talos again, what I would do is I would say, because the whole idea is that everything's taken for you is black box, right? That means whether they want to admit it or not, because they just barely had a beta support for NVIDIA, because they don't do GPUs. They're like, why are you need a GPU on Kubernetes? It's Kubernetes, it's microservices. It's not, what are you doing, machine learning model? You're probably doing it wrong, right? So the base of that architectural decision and making on Talos and Sidero's part is already well-founded. They're like, why are you doing that? It's probably not the place you should be doing that. I think the safety and reduced attack surface is fine. So this is where I think Talos could really be interesting. So let's and I still want to do this, right? I don't have the money for it right now, but I want to buy, I want to do a series on building a Talos cluster where you start by picking the hardware. So I want to buy, like, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7, 8 Optiplex. You could create a really kick-ass, highly performant Talos cluster on 6 Optiplexes for under $1,000. Under $1,000, and it would kick butt against the Raspberry Pi equivalent. And then what you do, now you have hardware that already has, God, you know what? I almost have that. I'm just thinking about this. I just had a breakthrough. I got to act on this thought before it leaves my brain, because I'm old. What if we did this? What if we did this? Oh my God. I only need 2 more. What if we did this? Where am I going to put all this hardware, though? Actually, I know exactly where I'm going to put it. Oh. As I said, I think Talos has a sweet spot. And its sweet spot is, turnkey Kubernetes on-prem. And that is its sweet spot, right? Kubernetes is still going to have relevance, and having turnkey Kubernetes on-prem is still very, very valid. But check it. What if I did this? What if I did that instead? As my training cluster, as my Talos cluster. I could make a separate Talos cluster out of. I already dropped the money on those on these Optiplexes here. And I have the 3 Optiplexes that I have to have. I bought these to manage the mini Kubernetes cluster because they have 3600 IOPS. You have to have disk write speed to do control planes properly. So I have to have those. All I need, if I buy 3 more Optiplexes, I actually don't even need 3. I could get away with 2. I like having at least 3 nodes, though. It's really not useful to have less than 3 nodes. So, damn, if I bought 3 nodes, where am I have the network space over here in the unmanaged and this unmanaged switch. If I buy 3 more nodes and I put PBS on here without having, because PBS doesn't need a control plane. Holy cow. I think I just figured out a way to do this so we can still do Talos and do it properly. So Talos is not going to work on a Mac Mini. No surprise there. Everyone's like, no, duh, dummy. But I thought I would try because, you know. So this would mean that Plex 3 would just be Trident 1 through 6. And Trident is exactly what they sound like. Big, hefty GPU systems with lots of terabyte space. They're custom made for PBS batch processing. That's exactly what those gaming systems are going to be fantastic for, and all that GPU can go to good use. So I can put PBS on there. PBS doesn't have a really high performant, massive HA top front end as far as OpenPBS is concerned, as far as I know, because it doesn't do that. That's what Kubernetes is for. So I can build interfaces to kick off my batch jobs and stuff. And Talos is a Linux distro Talos is a special Linux distro to run Sidero Labs, which is the thing that's going to run on a thing. So I'm 400. My wife's going to kill me. I actually have space for that. Because I just need those last 3. So that might be the revival of, if we do that, then we'll actually have 2 clusters too. What else we could do with that? We could make the Talos cluster, which is going to be this is going to be super duper highly performant because it's going to be all on SSD. All the disk is going to be SSD if I do local attached storage, or if I set up a storage class that combines these. We can make this the Talos cluster, and then this, because I still want to do turnkey. So let me just cut to the chase again. The best possible way to do Sidero Labs, which on Metal, is I think on multiple relatively humble machines and that have netboot TFTP, right? And if I do these optiplexes this way, I can have these things do the netboot, and then it gets past the Mac Mini problem. The Mac Mini problems, which can't boot off Pixie. So then I don't even need to put Pixie on here. That's what's so cool. I don't have to do the iPixie chain boot or anything. I just go into the BIOS. What I need to test on this, in fact, I just realized I got to test this like immediately, so before I buy more of them. If I've set up the DHCP server, which is the original plan, that's why I have one of the reasons I have air gap, so I can run 2 different DHCP servers, one from OpenSense for my family, and then one for my internal lab, and not have them overlap. If I set up a DHCP server on here, we're gonna go back to that. I got kind of double sidetracked on this. So we can actually put Talos on here. We could put Talos on these 3 systems. That'd be my Talos cluster, and we can test that out fully. And then we're not crossing the streams. We're not pushing Talos outside of what it's supposed to be good at. Another thing about that too is we can, I can just see already I'm going to need another machine bigger than this. I need to add more RAM here. Yeah, I have 28 cores here. I should probably put more core and more RAM in here and bump this up so we can put Firecracker on here to run micro VMs. And then we need to play around with micro VMs versus Talos. So Talos is like turnkey Kubernetes on-prem. And I do have room in this server to add. So I'm thinking about how I'm going to grow. This server, I could put, right now it's got 28 cores, 128 gigabyte of RAM, and it's up to 256 gigabyte of RAM. So if I double the RAM, which I think is like $12, it's like old RAM. If I added more RAM to it, I could probably push that up to, I'm guessing like 120, 130 VMs, and especially micro VMs, right? And micro VMs that have fractional CPU, by the way. And it's DRR RAM, actually. I take it back. I don't know. I need to figure out. So I'm going to keep building up this VM server, and then we'll have a Talos server as well. Talos is all about running on, Kubernetes on Metal. That's the whole point. So, it's like, which one's going to cost us more? This is going to cost more money for sure. In fact, I mean, the $400 it takes for me to get 3 of these nodes for the Talos server is going to be way more than the RAM and additional CPU to run some VMs to run Firecracker, micro VMs on here. It's going to be way. Again, I'm just coming to a conclusion here that's supported by the facts of my experimentation, and that is that the future is very likely going to be micro VMs over containers. They'll be together for sure, but when it comes to architectural deployment for an enterprise, I mean, the entire cloud is based on, I'm glad you said that. The entire cloud industry is based on turning it extremely performant virtualization, and there's big money in that technology. So that's why you see Amazon doing Firecracker and things like it. It's there's a lot of attention on doing because they know it. Also is tracking along those lines. I think she is too, actually, and I think you can hear. I mean, I know that she's this way. She's into the Rust thing lately, and Firecracker's all in Rust. That's the thing. So the micro VM concept is relatively new. I mean, I don't think Firecracker's even been out more than a year. But people are seeing, I think the industry has seen that virtualization beats containerization, hands down. And I mean, you even see remnants of this architectural reality in the fact that Podman makes sure to include systemd and a proper system CTL into its containerization because, as they said, and I read this exact thing, some people who run containers want to simulate an actual machine. Well, there's nothing better than a micro VM to compare that to. When you have a micro VM, you have a fucking machine. And so I could see this virtualization going, and the fact that Amazon's on board with this is already a huge thing. I mean, you definitely will have both. I'm not saying it has to be either or. I'm saying that sometimes containers, at the end of the day, containers are for applications. Can we just admit that, right? Containers have been abused so much and turned into so many other things besides what they are. The containers are for applications. The best possible container you can have is a from scratch binary that has a very minimal Docker file to even make it, right? That's it. And they've always been about simplifying applications and bringing together the pieces of an application. The fact that it happens to run an operating system and feel like a separate machine has always been an add-on or an extra. And I feel like the whole industry has come to depend on that, including me. I mean, last year, I was all about making workstation containers, and I was teaching the Linux Beginner Boost from Podman. And I was saying, okay, hey, look, this is your fastest way to get a Linux terminal. And it is. To this day, it still is. In fact, when we do the boost next year, that's what we're going to do. We're going to do all the 4 different ways to get Kubernetes, to get Linux. I'm sorry, to get a Unix command line. From your command line on a Mac, from a VM, from a container, or in the cloud, SSH. Those are the main ways to get a hold. Oh, and installing on your own machine. I think that's 5. So the 5 ways to get Linux. That's going in the boost, by the way. So that's going to be in next year's beginner boost. We're not going to go programming it. We're going to have its own boost. So and this is related to the title. This is like where you should what you should learn next. And I do think Rust is going to be here to stay. I think, as I've always said this. People are going to say, but you hate Rust, and I do hate Rust. I mostly hate the Rust community because they're just full of liars. But there is definitely going to be something like a VM hub. There will be. I don't know how. I think Cloud Init is going to be really huge in that space. Something like Cloud Init is already playing in that space. It's another reason that I think Red Hat's going to fall out of favor. I still think Red Hat's there, but Ubuntu Canonical's Cloud Init is huge in the containerization space and virtualization space, and its whole focus has not been on containers and stuff. It's been on how do we get our Ubuntu server up and running the fastest way possible, and that's where, I mean, whether you like it or hate it, that's where Cloud Init comes from. And I feel like Red Hat has really bought into this whole OpenShift Kubernetes view of the world, perhaps more than they should have, frankly, uh, because the stuff that they're doing with virtualization right now just completely dwarfs what's possible with Kubernetes. Um, so so yeah, I kind of see the right, and then the machine learning in me guy in me knows that Kubernetes can do machine learning, but it's not the best place to do it. The best place to do it is to put it on a big ass machine and let it run for a long time, and that's batch. And I think batch processing needs to get some love. And I am going to set up OpenPBS, and I am going to spread the love for OpenPBS that nobody talks about or knows about, because it's big and boring. Nobody cares. The biggest infrastructure in the world, and nobody even talks about it. They don't even talk about this. OpenPBS runs the biggest compute node collections in the fucking world, and nobody knows about it. So, Scalable supports millions of cores with fast job, minimal latency, tested beyond 50,000 nodes. 50,000 nodes. You can't even run 300 Kubernetes nodes without it falling on its face. And everybody reminds me in here all the time that the practical limit for a Kubernetes node is about 300 or 400. And even then, if you're doing stupid shit like, KubeVirt, who knows? You can't even do that. And the overhead and the complexity of the networking and everything is so high that it's just not really worth it. I think Excalibur, yeah. Yeah, I actually need to make a link to it. I have several, but I'll give you this one, copy. Yeah, you can, if you go over there, by the way, you can actually Susie has a microVM manager. They already have one. Wait, Firecracker is not from Susie. What is that? They have a Firecracker manager, virtual machine monitor for creating microVMs. Yeah, I'm telling you, man. I think microVMs are the future. I do. And I mean, hey, there you are. Anybody wants, it's kind of fun, isn't it? You kind of look around and see where you are. Isn't that fun? Yeah. And my job, my job is to do Kubernetes. And I told my manager point blank the other day, I know this is going to sound really weird, but I think we should work to get off of Kubernetes. As many of our applications as possible, I think we should push people off of Kubernetes. I think we should push them to go to batch, which they're already using, to go into the cloud. If they want Kubernetes, the cloud is great for that. But we should dissuade them from doing things like Tekton, because Vertex AI and Tekton are better in the cloud anyway. And if they want a truly on-prem cluster, if they want a true on-prem cluster, they should consider Talos for that. It's a turnkey solution, and the business model that I now probably don't want to participate in is, I don't know. I mean, I'll go ahead and say it. Well, at one point recently, I was thinking, man, there is a business model here to sell turnkey Talos hardware to anyone. So you could take turnkey Talos hardware and set it all up so that it net boots, and take a rack and get it all set up and sell that rack to companies and sell them an on-prem Kubernetes cluster. But if you look at Oxide Computing, they're doing exactly the same thing, but they're doing it with virtualization. And I'm pretty sure they're using Firecracker. There's no way to know that, but they're doing the same thing, but they're doing it with virtualization and not Kubernetes. So if you want Kubernetes, and you probably do want Kubernetes, even with all this other virtualization stuff going down, it still does orchestration of containers better than anything else. Then selling a Talos on-prem Kubernetes cluster, I think is a very valid business model. You want Kubernetes? Here we go. We got your Kubernetes in a box. How many nodes do you want? You put all the nodes in there. You build it all up, the hardware for them. You get it all set up so that Talos just runs on there. All they have to do is turn the key when they get to work, and boom, they got a full on-prem Kubernetes cluster, just like that, with an API already defined. That to me is a valid use of it, and that is, by the way, data coming back home as well. Yeah, Well, I think on-prem. I've been saying on-prem. I think on-prem is totally coming back, and this has been a huge pendulum in the industry since the 70s. Decentralized, centralized, decentralized, centralized, on-site, off-site. It's if you've been around the block long enough, you've seen this like swing. It just keeps swinging, and everybody has they all a whole bunch of innovators are made and get awards and everything, and they blah blah blah, and then somebody else gets innovation for saying they go back. It's like flares coming in style and going out in style every like 20 years. Yeah, so and I mean, you already see the trends. Companies have lost control of their cloud billing. Absolutely. They have no idea what they're paying for. And now in this tight economy that we're in, they're like, what the hell are we paying for? Right? And they're like, why can't we just run that on site? And then enter a company like Oxide. Oxide's like, hey, we got you. Right? We got you. You want to run that big, fancy, expensive cloud at home where you pay once for the hardware and then you pay for the power? We got you. I mean, this is Brian Cantrell. So Brian, this guy's a fucking genius. I mean, talking about architects who predict the future, he's been tracking history on this thing for a very long time, and he's like, no, it's coming back on prem. He made a whole company betted on it. This is all running off Rust internally, as far as we know. So I'm kind of interested in that. On-prem as a service, actually, Basecamp. You guys know about Basecamp, right? Yeah, just for Brian. Oh yeah, yeah. It's like. There's a really great article about Oxide's formation on, I think, Bloomberg. There's a guy out there who said that he literally said, I would give Brian Cantrell money to do venture capital to do whatever he wanted. And he took him up on it. It was like, he said it independently. And it's kind of, I have to find the article. And he's like, okay, this is what I think it's going to do. This is where it's going to go. So he's like, oh, it's going back on-prem. And but we're all watching them with great interest. I want them to succeed. But look at this, man. These are all VMs. Do you see any containers in here? Nope. These are all VMs, my friends. And they're probably running micro VMs. I haven't seen it. I'm super interested in it. So they have the whole networking layer and everything. So basically this is like, hey, all those virtualization thingies with storage, we're going to give you that in a box. Here you go. Here's your box. It's nice and pretty. Oh, that looks kind of cool too. Yeah. So, yeah, I think what I'm trying to say is I think that this is a thing. Oh, there's my neck here. That's my VLAN. I did port-based VLAN. They have a Golang SDK. I know, and Oxide's gonna have a Rust and a Golang SDK. So this is where it's going, right? So, and things like Firecracker are designed. In fact, I'm pretty sure Oxide is using Firecracker internally. I can't prove it, but I'm pretty sure that's what they're doing. And because they've been watching the Rust stuff. And the reason that Chris is interested in Rust, in my opinion, is because of all this activity in the micro VM space with regard to Rust. And I can't fault that. That is the sweet spot for what Rust could be doing. And just as long as people don't lie about Linux being rewritten in Rust and shit like that, that's not what's happening. What's happening is that we're being able, Rust is enabling enterprise scale development in the C space for development of micro VMs and virtualization. I think Rust could be a really kick-ass language in the virtualization space because it has everything that it needs. When you talk about like really, really tiny footprints and you talk about kick-ass speed and like low-level management and really all the things that Rust people love to talk about, who gives a shit if it's running as WebAssembly in a web browser someplace? I mean, that's fine and all. But where it really, really comes in powerfully is as, a new virtualization technology. When I found out that CoreOS and that kind of thing, and that they tried to rewrite Docker and Go, I was like, no. That's a Rust space. It's very clearly a Rust space. Let the Rust people have their fun there. Let those people who love to over-engineer shit and get all crazy, let's let them play in that space because they will make us the most tiny and elite kind of micro VM kind of stuff. And that's exactly what Firecracker is. C to describe Rust. Enterprise scale C, that's what Rust is. And look, I can rag on the Rust community and all of those other things, and they do rub me the wrong way. But this is where Rust's sweet spot is. And to see Chris jump into that space because of that, when she says things like Rust is the future, it annoys me because she doesn't qualify that. And so, some middleware programmer who's writing Go applications for running containers is going to see that and go, oh, I'm going to write all of my containers in Rust instead of Go. That would be a huge mistake, right? So, Rust is the right tool for the job. And definitely Rust is absolutely the right tool for the job for this. For Firecracker, it's absolutely the sweet spot. This is why I have been watching the Firecracker project and Oxide Computing like a hawk, because these two areas are the absolute killer apps for Rust. Of all the things, that and Gamozo's fuzzing. Gamozo's fuzzing, where he writes operating systems really fast in Rust that he's sure are correct. Fuzzing, like low level kernel level fuzzing and stuff like that is by far the absolute niche sweet spot for Rust, because you're absolutely guaranteed not to make mistakes while you're doing your fuzzing and getting false positives because you're the one who screwed it up because you wrote it in a C. I cannot overstate my support for fuzzing with Rust like Gamozo does. That is in my opinion, that is the number one killer app, best niche use of Rust I have ever seen. You want to absolutely eliminate any possible mistakes that you make in order to get a solid test of low-level stuff in the kernel and things like that, and by writing your own operating systems and virtualizing that. And that's what he does. And by the way, that's in the virtualization space as well. So if virtualization is going to take over from the container space to be like in the IT architecture space, Rust is right there, because Rust comes at the nexus of the kernel and the virtualization layer. That's why we should be excited about Rust being anywhere near the Linux kernel, because it fits that. And Control talks about this in Is It Time to Rewrite the Operating System in Rust? Which, spoiler alert, no, he says. But the layer that integrates with the kernel, right there at that layer, that boundary, and that creates things that are testing the kernel or integrates into the kernel, that whole eBPF space. Probably better to not write eBPF stuff. Maybe you should write Rust stuff instead. That's still in the kernel space and not in user land. eBPF was forced onto the world basically because of containerization, in my opinion. And because they're like, hey, we want access to all this kernel stuff, and now they've done it and they've made a huge mistake. And you just watch Chris own. How many times has Chris done a stream on owning clusters with eBPF vulnerabilities now? So. This has been a fun thing to talk about for me, but if nothing more, this has given me you can see your cursor there. Thanks to our visitors there. I see you there. It makes me stoked too, Killer Bunny, because here's the thing. I have been pegged. I'm rather famous for being a Rust hater, and I just want to say it. If Rust is synonymous with micro-virtualization, which gives me goosebumps to think about it, but I think it is. I think Rust is synonymous with micro-virtualization and micro-VMs. And that's my very layman's, terminology for the thing. Somebody like Chris could explain it much better than me. But if that's true, then one, it's a very exciting time to be a Rust developer if you're gonna be in that space of virtualization, and two, we need to be watching these micro VM things like a hawk, because they're going to take a significant chunk out of everything that's being deployed in Kubernetes right now. Because all the shit that does no business being in Kubernetes, like KubeVirt for God's sakes, and all the networking hassles and all that stuff, and Metal OB and all of that. All the load balancing stuff, by the way, I've decided I am not using VPN anymore. I'm not. And Krager's going to really take exception. Is he listening? Is Krager there? Krager's going to hate me for saying all this stuff, because Krager is hugely into the do all things Kubernetes space. One of the contributors and participants on the cluster CTL. I think the entire cluster CTL movement is misguided. I think the entire thing, I can safely say, I feel like the entire cluster CTL movement is off the rails, on the wrong track. And I still think that it needs to happen, because we have these Talos kind of things happening over here. That's what these things are, right? I still think we need to have turnkey Kubernetes solutions that are going to be uh, that are going to require the management of hardware, and that you're going to start to see. I mean, if Talos is not already using eBPF to manage the kernels on the machines that it runs on via Talos Linux, I would be really surprised. And there's going to still be a need for that. There's still going to be a need for that eBPF. So eBPF is probably valid, but I feel like I feel like that it's going to continue to remain a niche space. And it's how we're going to actually find out here, because we're gonna make a decision. Is it easier to do Terraform or Ansible and fire up an entire Kubernetes cluster and pre-configure it through infrastructure as software from Ansible, or is it faster to set up a Talos cluster? Which one's better? Which one's faster and more likely to be secure? The Talos. So we're gonna test that. We're gonna test that. So stay tuned, I guess. I mean, not tonight, but immutable clusters. Immutable clusters are not a bad thing, but in order to have immutable clusters, you have to have the eBPF layer long term, because how else are they going to deal drivers and stuff? How are they going to communicate with the kernel? How else are they going to truly manage that hardware? They've got to manage that hardware, and they've got to create driver support, and all of that stuff. They've got to do that. Yeah, I think there's a few people that are thinking this way, and Tony Faw's one of them. But and by the way, I am not like shitting on Kubernetes. I'm just saying, this is like I do with Rust. It's like, use the right tool for the job. Kubernetes is not the right tool, in my opinion, for long running machine learning jobs and for highly persistent applications. It never was the right tool for that job. And there's other tools out there that people have been ignoring, and they have this. Well, it's funny because when Nova got on the Rust thing, I was kind of annoyed, and it still had not come around to. I don't even know if she's thinking about the micro VM thing. I think she might be, though. I haven't seen her say that, but just for my own experimentation in a Homelab, and so let's bring this full circle. I wouldn't have had any of these insights myself if I hadn't had really created a diagram and started drawing out my own architecture and thinking as an infrastructure engineer, what makes more sense, right? So what is easier? How can I be lazier? And you don't have those thoughts unless you have a system that you care about. I mean, the whole air gap thing was a huge part of that. The tells. So as you start to think about these things, you're like, God, why don't I just, when I came to the realization, it's just easier for me to run an actual KVM with libvirt, not even using Proxmox or anything. And I can do that remotely. You guys have seen this, right? I'm really proud of this, but I can go over here and I can run my virt manager from here, and it pops up over X11, and I have my libvirt. I didn't need Proxmox or anything. I can double click on it, and I can open up, this is my virtual machine over here. And now I've got it. If I don't want libvirt over here, I can just run viewer on number 8 and just pull up my thing right away. This kind of stuff that I just did, there's no way a container could ever be involved with this. So, I mean, it's like so much simpler to deal with this kind of thing using these methods. This is a machine that's like 4 hops away from the Windows machine that I connected to it from. And yet that display was just showing up on X11. Now, I could use VNC. It does support VNC and all those other things. But the reason I brought up that example again is because I would not have seen the laser option had I not tested things. So the takeaway, there's a lot of things here I've talked about, but the takeaway in terms of becoming an infrastructure engineer, and I did start writing on that book, that I do want to write some more on before I go to bed, is that a big piece in your evolution of your engineering education is an investment in your own home lab and an investment in asking questions about what would be a more efficient way to do it. And the more that you experiment on your jalopy, in your corner over here, the more you're going to discover things, and you're like, wow, well, why don't I just do that? In fact, I told this story before, but I got pegged to be the corporate mail administrator because I was running my own mail server at home in 2002 or something. And they lost their guy, and they had me. It says, anybody got any SMTP mail send mail experience? I said, well, I'm running my own send mail server at home. And they went, you're the guy. And so because I had a home lab and I had been experimenting with these things, I was able to get that job and step up. Honestly, it just meant more responsibility for the same pay. But whatever. I mean, eventually, I want to hope that I got more out of it later, long term. But it definitely meant that I was able to do it. And I did get good reviews and stuff at that company. I always did. But so having a home lab is a part of that. And another thing I just want to, before I end the YouTube video here, is just in the process of talking through this with this community, which is really great. If you haven't found, I used to go to the Linux meetup, and we would bring rigs in. We would bring our rigs in to the meetup and talk about them, and we would talk about what we had done and stuff. And we were basically doing what we're doing on Twitch, just without the ability, just in person. So if you haven't found a community to run your ideas by, you need to, I would suggest probably finding one. Look at these cute icons from all you guys. It's fantastic. I'm so glad you could come on in here and share your icons there. Whoever gifted me, I don't know who did it, but somebody gifted me a free year of Excalibur, and I just want to really thank you for that. That was like an $80 purchase, and I really appreciate it. I absolutely love this, and I'm actually going to get rid of my whiteboard over here. I am. I'm going to put a fireplace on the TV in the background, or something, and then that whiteboard will go away. We spent all that time out doing an IRL stream to go buy the whiteboard, and then I'm going to get rid of it now. This whiteboard is just so much better. I love it. You can draw things so easily on it. So I know I have like 5 tablets someplace. I got to go find them and get it in here. Then I could just do the tapping thing. But you know what's so crazy is these use Bezier curves, so they're not even that hard to administer by yourself, just using your mouse. They're really, really easy. I love it. It's one of the greatest tools I've ever seen. And I was a big Draw.io fan, but the reason I like this more is it's more loosey-goosey. It's more artistic. And I actually really appreciate that personally. So I think that's probably the end of this video for right now. Maybe the end of the stream. But I did want to talk about this and some more and explain why I'm dropping Talos. Actually, by the end of the stream, I've already concluded I'm going to be adding Talos back. Let's go ahead and add it on here, shall we? Yeah, let's add back a Talos cluster. So let's we'll surround this guy. I mean, I don't know if anybody wants to watch this, but we're going to go add another box. We'll add another box around this. This is going to be my Talos cluster. I'm actually going to do it. I'm going to drop another $400 just to test Talos, because I want the turnkey Talos thing to be a thing. Actually, as I said, I still want to be able to make them, build a rack of a Talos server. If you could basically duct tape these optiplexes. Good night, JW. Apple sells these called AirTags, so you no longer lose those devices. AirTags? Oh, right. AirTags, really? That's a thing? Yeah, so this is going to be the Talos cluster, and it will be my final cluster. I promise. So, I don't know where we're going to put it. This is going to be Talos. So that's cool, because then we can have preload icons. Oh, I know they do. They have a lot of great icons. I like making my own icons. That's half the fun. So, I don't know where to put this. I'll find someplace to put this later. But this is going to be Talos, and it's going to be properly managed Talos with turnkey stuff. Because I actually do want to go through the process for people that want to build a Kubernetes cluster. What I was going to say in the evolution path. So let me finish up on the evolution thing. So the first thing you should buy. So what to get when, and I already wrote this, but I'm gonna write it again. So the first thing you need is a computer So the first thing you need is just a regular computer, uh, you know, regular Mac or Windows computer, uh, just for for gaming and computing and internet and all your needs. If you don't have that, then with admin, you should have admin access to it. Okay, that's the first thing you should do. And so if you're 9 years old, and I told you I read that thing from that kid who was 9 years old when he started, and I had to convince his parents, hey, he needs a computer. And it can be a laptop. It can be, not, right? And frankly, it should probably be a Windows machine. And let me tell you why. So this is a true story. I started with this guy, and he had we put for the last 3 years of SkillStack, I made everybody have to have a computer before they could come to me because we wanted to put Linux on there. So we installed Linux on there by hand, and he did it. But eventually, they would start to get annoyed. They were like, I can't play video games except because they're young. And another guy actually got a really expensive gaming system. And then he was like, well, if I put Linux on there, I can't play all these games, right? So I truly believe that in order to be a balanced engineer, infrastructure engineer, you actually need to learn Mac, Windows, and Linux, Unix. And to some Linux people, that is an absolute heresy to say that. Thank you for that, Paul. It's an absolute heresy to say that. Like, oh my God, all you need is Linux. No, if you're going to be a successful IT professional today, you have to be able to operate a Mac or a Windows computer, and I believe a Unix or Linux computer as well. Now, most people in their first years are all Mac or all Windows, and they have big fights about whether they're a Mac person or a Windows person, which is completely irrelevant and stupid. And they're just a tool, and you need to learn the tool. And the best tool for gaming and streaming is Windows. I'm sorry. SolidWorks, you want to do any 3D sort of thing? Windows. It just is. It just is. And I'm not going to debate that with anybody. There's overwhelming evidence of that. So the best possible tool for, I believe, for particularly software development and sound engineering is a Mac. And for engineering, if all you're doing is software development, if all you're doing is like straight up 24/7 software development, particularly in the front end world. So for example, Rob Pike, who invented Go, big Mac user, been a big Mac user forever. Do you think he cares that about Apple? No, it's just BSD, and he's used to Unix, and it's got, Mac is, like it or not, Mac computers are the number one Unix distribution in the world, far outstretching Linux. Привет, переключать на русский при разговоре, or better speak English. Вы можете на русском, если хотите. Мне все равно, оно все равно. Okay. Да. Спасибо. So somebody's just asking if it's okay to talk with anybody in Russian here, and I'm just saying, yeah, that's fine, but maybe they won't understand you. In the consumer space anyway, yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, it's not even counting AIX or slurs or anything. The point is, right tool for the job, right? So yeah, you start with a Mac. Now, then I think you should get, personally, I think you should acquire an old or cheap laptop or desktop and install Linux. Okay, so I've written these before, but I'm writing them again. Right? You could, before you even get there, though, you could install VMware Player and explore different Unix distros. I'll put Unix/Linux. And you can run VMware. You can run BSD Unix on VMware and give it a chance to see what it's about. Very, very, very. У меня акцент. Американский, как это сказать? Американский акцент. Я больше не бываю. Я больше не умею произносить все это. Американский. Американский, да, конечно. Конечно, я уже все это забыл. Но было давным-давно, я каждый день говорил по-русски. В это время нет. У меня не такие возможности разговаривать на русском языке. По-русски. По-русски или на русском? На русском это он скажет на русском, когда это написано, да? Но по-русски он говорит так, когда он говорит в смысле we're doing writing some guidebook, yeah. So we're writing a guidebook, yeah. And I'm about to wrap it up. So so install VMware Player and explore different Linux distros. Acquire an older cheap laptop and desktop, install Linux. Invest, and then this is the last one. These are all ones because reasons. Used to develop others BSD. Absolutely, I love BSD. I absolutely love BSD. I do. And I was actually really enjoying reliving BSD on my ISSH into my OpenSense router. Yeah, my OpenSense router is running BSD, and so that's actually why, I don't know if you saw, but I changed the boost. The boost is now the Unix boost. It's no longer this Unix beginner boost. It's no longer the Linux beginner boost, and that's specific because of that. Because I think you should learn all Unix, especially now. Because here's the thing with virtualization. The other reason I'm really a big fan of virtualization is that we won't have to care about what the OS is anymore. At all. We won't have to care. So you can run BSD. And this whole containerization lock into LXC is a huge problem, and I don't like it. I like that virtualization frees us from specific distributions and specific Unix types. Virtualization lets the landscape of free and open source system software flourish to the maximum. LXC Linux containers do not allow that. In fact, if the entire spirit of free and open source software is the promotion of innovation and ideas across the board, then micro-virtualization is a much better future than LXC containerization, which is the one that's winning right now, which is Linux only. You have to learn it. It's definitely a positive thing. But can you imagine a world where the next BOS might get involved, might get invented? People can write their own OSs. People can experiment with their own OSs if we get into this virtualization space. Gamozo does it all the time. And the way we stand right now, unless virtualization continues to move forward, we're going to be stuck in this containerization world, and we're going to be stuck on taking whatever the people who come after Linus Torvalds gives us and using it, because it's the only thing we'll be able to use. And I do not trust the Linux. The Linux community has done us well for a long time, but as of this moment, I don't trust the Linux community at all. I think that the stuff that's coming out now, and it will be coming out after Torvalds is gone, is going to cause a huge resurgence in BSD and System 5 and all of these other operating systems, and that is going to drive and be driven by a focus on virtualization over containerization again, a return to it. And I am super happy to be a part of that, and I want to be a part of that. So you should learn virtualization pretty early on. Blair stream, your life is really fun. Thank you. You do great creative videos. Yeah, I made some video games. They were lame. I made Flappy Birds and a bunch of stuff for other kids. I mean, I don't make games in general, because unless it's to trick somebody into learning how to code so they can go do something more important. I know I just alienated the entire software and game development category by saying that, but look, when I was young, I made video games. I made video games when I was 14 on my Atari. I made these really horrible like Missile Command knockoffs. And I got that out of my system. And now if I'm making something, I usually want to make something more significant than that. Nothing wrong with making video games. But I love them. I've been having a lot of fun with Overwatch 2 lately, actually. People hate Overwatch 2. I love it. I love it. I love the escape of it. Dota 2 as well. The international starts next week. I'm looking forward to that. All right. So if you're what should you get? So this is the last step here. So after you've got the old cheap laptop with Linux on there and you practice installing that, then you should probably invest in a refurbished invest in a refurbished enterprise grade server tower, VM host server tower, tower server, whatever you want. And this is this piece right here. So this piece right here, this central piece of my system here, is this right here. And that's gonna, I'm actually, the more I've been looking at investing in virtualization and trying Firecracker and stuff, I don't know if I have to install Firecracker as an operating system or not. I think I might have to actually do that. And I might end up with a separate Firecracker server separate from this, or if I can actually run it on the same system. But suffice it to say, and I think Het Tennis would agree with me on this, to just see the plan. What plan? This plan? Or this? The Unix engineering plan? No, I'm writing it right now. I'm actually writing it at this moment. This is this repo is in, if you want to follow the writing on this is actually going to be a book. It's part of a book I've been wanting to write for a while. So if you go to engineer, that's going to have the plan in it. Okay. So and I've just barely started it. And I know what's going to go in it. I've known this for a long time. There's a hint of this if you go into my Homelab directory already. It's in the README. I actually wrote something about this in here already. It's at the top here. Hardware summary, planned use cases, infrastructure stack, design decisions, no free IPA, no Proxmox, no VMs. No, I'm not doing that. Stacked within Kubernetes. So no, that's completely wrong. We're using stacked Kubernetes. We're not using that either. I need to redo all of this. Cyclically login. I'm not doing that. I want to do that. I'm not doing it yet though. No disk encryption. That's a given. Anyway, so here's the personal lab with SSH to cloud server. So, actually, I forgot that step. So that's just learning how to use a computer, right? Then we could say SSH access to a cloud server running Linux. So that's actually relatively easy to get and costs you $5 a month and gives you a bunch of immediate access. Installing VMware Player is also something you can do. Kind of at the same time as that. You really need both. Get an old laptop and install it. So far that's 3 of the 5 ways to get Linux, right? SSH into a cloud server, locally on a VMware server, bare metal installed on a machine, and what was the third one? Oh, inside of a container. Install Podman desktop and practice using Linux from containers. So that's the third way, or the fifth way. Did I get that right? And getting an old cheap laptop and desktop and install Linux. Invest in a refurbished enterprise VM host server. And KVM. So that, and then After that, after this, you probably start wanting to get a switch. I think you should probably try to do maybe a Talos cluster. You can set up a cluster. There's many free solutions out there on the cloud. SSH access to a cloud server. Yeah, cloud server. We should probably put obtain, right, free or cheap cloud server running Linux. This is not really obvious to absolute beginner, but it is something they can do. It can be careful telling people to do that because it's really easy for them to get the cost models wrong and end up having to pay all kinds of money, and then their parents get mad at them. I've had that happen before. I had a kid set up a DigitalOcean server account, and I told his parents and everything what it was going to cost, and he bought a name, a DNS name that he paid like I don't know, $50 a year for it. They got a bill, and I got a complaint from the parents. It's like, you didn't tell me that we're going to charge me $50 every year for this name, this stupid DNS name. I'm like, oh my God, woman, get the fuck out of my face. I was done with her after that. I was like, I helped your son or daughter, I can't remember who, get set up, with a DNS name, and they have their own website, and they're like 12, and you're complaining because you have to pay a little bit of money every year for them to have their own domain name. Really? Bye-bye. Meanwhile, you get these other amazing parents who send me these emails saying they wish I was still around for their kid, but I'm on Twitch now. So anyway, random story. Invest in a refurbished enterprise Linux VM host server. And then after this, it's kind of like, after that point, I think you kind of need to build like a physical cluster. Consider a cluster of physical machines refurbished. And you notice there's no Raspberry Pis in here. Raspberry Pis are not worth the money. And frankly, they weren't worth the money when they were cheaper because they don't do anything. They're super cool, and they're really great for doing projects and stuff like that. And they're really, really fun to play with. And we had them as a core part of Skill Stack, but you don't get as much as you think out of them. Mostly because they can't be reimaged with many different types of Linux. They're really locked down to the M1 type of Linux. So, Optiplex. Why Podman and not Docker? Because Podman Desktop runs on all OSs, including Mac M1 and M whatever. Docker Desktop is proprietary software that you have to pay for if you use it in any capacity that matters. And they try to lock you in. I am philosophically opposed more to Docker these days than I've ever been before. I will not recommend them to anybody. Docker did a pretty nasty bait and switch. They got the entire world hooked on Docker Desktop, and then 2 years ago they said, "Psych, you have to pay now." It was never free, but it's it's not everybody. We don't want to get too mad at us engineers and small companies, but it's you big fat cats that have been like stealing our stuff and using it for free all this time. You have to pay up, and you have to pay up big. Companies, the corporations that had to turn over the money for that were paying in the order of tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars a year in subscription fees overnight. And overnight being about a year, lead time for them to, we'll give you some time. We're going to give you a grace period to become compliant. And they sprung that shit on the corporate world like at the last minute. And if you deal with people in the corporate enterprise architecture space, you know what a shitty thing it is that they did. I'll never go there again. In fact, companies are going to ask the email. Oh yeah, their Docker has just proven that it's completely lost its way. It kind of lost its way when it didn't play nice with Kubernetes, and Kubernetes had to do the Kubernetes shim all that time. And then they say, well, because they wanted to enforce everybody to be dependent on the Docker container engine. And then Red Hat, everybody's like, oh, fuck no, we're not doing that. And so they come out with the Open Container Initiative, and they got rid of it, and now it's completely banished from almost any Kubernetes cluster anywhere. In fact, I don't even use the word Docker anymore. People used to say Docker containers like they say, I don't know, and I won't use the word Docker anymore ever. And I am not a huge Red Hat fan, but the one thing Podman does do that I have tested is it works on Windows, Mac, and Linux, obviously, and it just works out of the box. Docker Desktop works out of the box. In fact, it works so well that, and as I understand it, Rancher Desktop does now as well. When I tested Rancher Desktop, it was a disaster. But I tested Podman Desktop 2 weeks ago, and it worked on everything. It even automatically installs WSL on your Windows box, not WSL2. It doesn't work with WSL2, which is crap. And so having Podman Desktop is, in my opinion, is a must. So we're actually going to test this hypothesis because one of the requirements is to, like for Talos CTL, which I still want to do, as I said, is to run it inside in the tutorial, is to run a Docker container engine. So I'm actually going to install Podman on HPZ 640, my VM server, and it's VM/container server, and I'm going to use that, and I'm going to follow the Talos CTL instructions and see what it gives me. I don't know if it's going to work. We're going to find that out. Okay, so consider a cluster of physical machines. Yeah. So of Kate's physical machines. Now, when you get the cluster of physical machines, you can go ahead and start to experiment with Talos or kubeadm from scratch, and you have to know how to do that things if you're gonna get into the Kubernetes space, at least until something better comes around. But that's really it. So I think that's kind of you start out with just a computer, and then you start out with some free or cheap, Linux access through SSH, which doesn't take much. That's not hard to learn, and I've done that. Skillstack.sh used to be free access for people who want to shell access. And there's lots of free access to stuff now. Install VMware Player, so I would say Do, AWS, Replit. Those are all ways you can get free Linux access if you want in the cloud. And then you should probably install VMware Player and explore different Linux distros. Install different Linux distros. Then you should probably maybe play around with Podman Desktop and practice using Linux from containers. Then you should get an old laptop and install Linux straight on it. Killer Code stuff is super cool too. Yeah, I didn't really look into it that much. I do think it's cool. We should probably put that on there too. Yeah. Get free, cheap cloud server running. Linux Cloud Access, let's say. I like it, but the problem I don't like about it is it's designed for interactive learning instead of exploration. I think that's probably my biggest critique of Killer Coda. Replit is not. Replit is just a machine. You just go on there and play with it. And it's designed for coding, but you can actually bypass the coding interface and go straight to the shell if you want. But DigitalOcean, AWS, or any of those, or Azure actually, it's got a free one. GCP, they all have freebies that are different levels. Actually, Oracle has a quad-core CPU, 16 gigabyte free. Oracle's trying to get people to use their service, and they're giving away a really, really big free instance, being for interactive focus. Yeah, I think Killer Code is great for teachers, but if I were just starting out, I don't know that I would want to. It's not the whole point here is that you're gonna go get your hands dirty. So a bit harder than that to do that. You know. So yeah. Anyway, that's pretty much it for tonight. I don't really have much more. Let's go ahead and just head on. Let's go raid Mr. Het Tennis if he's on. Oh, the Dota TI is on. Shit. 135,000 people are watching Dendi play Dota. uh, oh, what's her face is on. Dial Jess is on too. No, Het's not on right now. What other? Do you guys want to watch techies or do you want to go to the music? As for YouTube, goodbye YouTube.